Welcome. Tonight, we explore one of the darkest moments in galactic history. Not the destruction of Alderaan itself, but what comes after. 2 billion lives, erased in 3 seconds by the Death Star's superlaser. A planet of peace, art, and culture, reduced to an asteroid field. We have seen this tragedy from the perspective of heroes like Princess Leia. But tonight, we follow someone else. Lyra Antilles, a music teacher who survived by chance, who was not home when her world died. This is not a story about epic battles or Jedi warriors. This is about what happens to the soul when everything is taken away. How do you maintain your principles in a galaxy that punishes compassion? When does survival become betrayal? What do you become when your entire civilization vanishes, and you are left to carry its memory alone? There are no easy answers here. No triumphant endings, only the raw reality of living through the unthinkable. This is what it is like to be a survivor of Alderaan's destruction. Let us begin. I remember the taste of Castilian mint tea on my tongue the morning everything ended. Not my life. That continued, unfortunately. But everything that made that life worth living. The bitter-sweet flavor lingered as I stood in my apartment on the 40th level of Alderaan, watching the twin suns of Alderaan rise over the Apalis coast, painting the royal palace in shades of amber and gold that seemed too beautiful to be real. The Jorana birds were singing their morning chorus outside my window, their melodic calls weaving through the scent of grass flowers drifting up from the Lear Valley meadows below. I was 28 years old, a music instructor at the Royal Conservatory, and I believed, truly believed, that civilization was built on art, diplomacy, and the fundamental principle that violence only begot more violence. My name is Lyra Antilles, and I am one of the last people who will ever smell Alderaanian grass flowers in bloom, who will ever hear the true song of a Jorana bird, who will ever taste authentic Castilian tea made from leaves grown in soil that no longer exists. I am a survivor of Alderaan's destruction, which means I'm a keeper of ghosts, a walking memorial to 2 billion lives that were atomized in 3 seconds by a weapon so monstrous that the mind recoils from comprehending it. This is my testimony, my confession, my attempt to answer a question that has no answer. What do you become when your entire world, not metaphorically, but literally, is reduced to an asteroid field and you are left alive to carry the weight of everything that was lost? But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning. To the person I was before I learned that planets can die, that 2 billion voices can be silenced in an instant, that everything you believe about peace and civilization can be revealed as beautiful lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. That morning, I was preparing for a lecture on the harmonics of Alderaanian classical composition, running through my notes while finishing my tea. My apartment was modest but comfortable. 1 main room with a sleeping alcove, a small kitchen, and a balcony that overlooked the city. The walls were painted in the soft cream color traditional to Alderaanian architecture, decorated with hollow frames displaying images of my family. My parents on their wedding day, my younger sister Tyra at her graduation from the Diplomatic Academy. The 2 of us as children playing in the palace gardens during the Festival of Light. Tyra worked at the Alderaan spaceport, processing cargo manifests and customs declarations. She had called me the night before, her voice tight with a tension I had learned to recognize over the past few months. The Imperial inspections are getting more aggressive, she had said, her image flickering slightly in the holographic projection. They're looking for any connection to rebel activity, any excuse to shut down shipping routes. Lyra, I'm worried. I had reassured her with the same arguments I had been telling myself. Alderaan was protected by senatorial immunity. Princess Leia was one of the most respected diplomats in the Senate. We were too culturally and politically significant for the Empire to seriously threaten. What could they possibly do? Destroy a planet renowned throughout the galaxy for its commitment to peace, art, and education. The irony of that question would haunt me for the rest of my life. I finished my tea, set the cup in the cleaning unit, and gathered my data pads for the day's classes. The conservatory was a 20-minute commute by speeder bus, winding through the sculpted parks and residential towers that made Alderaan one of the most beautiful cities in the core worlds. I loved that commute. Loved watching the city wake up, the morning light catching on the crystal spires of the palace, the vendors setting up their stalls in the marketplace, the students hurrying to early classes at the university. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of order and continuity that stretched back thousands of years. Alderaan had never had a standing army, had never needed one. We resolved conflicts through dialogue, through cultural exchange, through the patient work of diplomacy. I had seen the hollow recordings of the Clone Wars, of course, the chaos, the destruction, the billions dead. It had reinforced everything my education had taught me, that militarism was a dead end, that violence was a failure of imagination and will. The Empire was brutal, oppressive, corrupt, but open rebellion would only lead to more suffering, more death. Better to resist through culture, through education, through maintaining the values of civilization even in an increasingly barbaric galaxy. This was what I believed. This was what I taught my students, young musicians who came to the conservatory from across Alderaan and beyond, seeking to master the intricate harmonies of our traditional forms. That day never came. I never gave that lecture, never returned to my apartment, never saw my sister again. Instead, I boarded a trade freighter called the Stellar Wanderer, carrying a shipment of rare instruments to an exhibition in the Chandrila system. It was a routine trip, 3 days' journey through hyperspace, the kind of work I did occasionally to supplement my teaching income. The freighter was a modified YT series transport, its holds converted to climate-controlled storage for delicate cargo. There were 12 passengers and crew aboard. Captain Rhys Vallow, a grizzled Corellian who had been running cargo for 40 years, his co-pilot and wife, Shara, 3 crew members handling engineering and communications, and 6 passengers, including myself and 4 other Alderaanians heading to various destinations in the core. I shared a cabin with another passenger, an elderly man named Bail Tyran, who was traveling to Coruscant to visit his daughter. He was a retired professor of philosophy from Alderaan University, and we spent the first day of the journey in pleasant conversation about music theory and ethics. He had kind eyes, weathered hands, and a gentle humor that reminded me of my father. The second day, I spent most of my time in the cargo hold, checking on the instruments. A fizz, a halakset, several wind chimes from the Crystal Valley whose tones were said to induce meditative states. I ran my fingers over the polished wood of the fizz, feeling the smooth grain, imagining the concerts where it would be played. The third day, I woke to the sound of alarms. Not the gentle chime of a standard wake-up call, but the harsh, insistent wail of an emergency alert. I dressed quickly, my heart already beginning to race with a formless dread, and made my way to the common area where Captain Vallow had gathered everyone. His face was ashen, his hands trembling slightly as he manipulated the holographic projector. "I need you all to see this," he said, his voice rough. "There's no easy way. Alderaan." He couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he activated the recording. The hollow image materialized in the center of the room. A massive battle station, spherical, the size of a small moon, hanging in space above a blue-green planet I recognized instantly. Alderaan, my home. The image was from a long-range sensor recording, the timestamp showing it was less than 8 hours old. As we watched, a dish on the battle station's surface began to glow with a sickly green light. The light intensified, coalesced into a beam that lanced out and struck Alderaan's northern hemisphere. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the planet began to expand, its surface rupturing in a ring of fire that spread around the equator. The oceans boiled away, the continents shattered, the atmosphere ignited. And then, in a flash of light so bright the sensors automatically dimmed, Alderaan exploded, fragmenting into billions of pieces that dispersed into an expanding cloud of debris. The recording ended. The hologram faded. We stood in silence, staring at the empty space where the image had been. I heard someone laughing, a high, hysterical sound. I realized it was me. "That's not real," I said. "It's a technical error, some kind of sensor malfunction." Captain Vallow shook his head slowly. "I've confirmed it with 5 separate sources. Imperial comm channels, independent news services, even rebel intelligence. It's real, Lyra. Alderaan is gone." He manipulated the controls again, bringing up the official Imperial statement, a cold, bureaucratic text that announced the destruction of Alderaan as a necessary measure to combat rebel terrorism and restore order to the core worlds. 2 billion people. My mother, who taught literature at the university. My father, who worked in the agricultural ministry, managing the grassland preservation programs. My sister, Tyra, who was probably at the spaceport when it happened, probably looking up at the sky as the green light descended. My students, young Mira, who had just mastered the difficult transition passages in the Lament of Torul. Jackson, who composed his own pieces that blended traditional Alderaanian modes with Corellian jazz. Little Wren, who was only 12 but played with the sensitivity of someone 3 times her age. My colleagues at the conservatory, the vendors in the marketplace, the woman who ran the tea shop where I spent my afternoons, the couple who lived next door and argued loudly but always made up with laughter. Every person I had ever passed on the street, every face I had seen on the speeder bus, every voice in the crowds at festivals. Gone, atomized, reduced to their component molecules and scattered across the empty space where a planet had been. I stood there, surrounded by the other passengers, and felt absolutely nothing. The shock was too profound for emotion. It was as if my mind had simply refused to process the information, had cordoned it off in some distant corner where it could not be examined too closely. Around me, the other Alderaanians were reacting in different ways. Baal Tyran walked silently to his cabin and closed the door. A young couple, I learned later they had been married only 3 months, were traveling to their honeymoon, collapsed into each other's arms and wept. A woman my age, whose name I never learned, began screaming, a raw sound of anguish that seemed to come from somewhere beyond human vocal cords. Captain Vallow gave us time. He diverted the Stellar Wanderer to the nearest safe port, a small way station called Formos in the Outer Rim, and told us we could stay aboard as long as we needed. Over the next few days, the reality began to penetrate. It came in waves, each one hitting harder than the last. I would be going about some routine task, eating a meal, washing my face, staring out a viewport at the stars, and suddenly the enormity of it would crash over me, and I would have to grip whatever surface was nearest to keep from falling. My home, my entire world, everything I had ever known or loved or taken for granted, erased, as if it had never existed. The question that haunted me, that I could not escape, was the question Captain Vallow had asked that first day. "Where do you want to go?" I had no answer. Alderaan had been my home, my only home. I had traveled occasionally, brief trips for conferences or exhibitions, but always with the certainty that I would return, that my apartment and my job and my life would be waiting for me. Now I was adrift, a piece of debris from a destroyed world, with nowhere to anchor myself. I had 200 credits in my account. No family, no home. A skill set, music instruction and theory that seemed utterly useless in a galaxy at war. After 2 weeks at Formos, I received a message from the Rebel Alliance. It was a general broadcast sent to all known Alderaanian survivors. The Alliance mourns with you. Alderaan's destruction is an atrocity that will not be forgotten. We offer refuge, support, and the opportunity to ensure that your homeworld's sacrifice was not in vain. Join us. Fight back. The message included coordinates for the Alliance base on Yavin 4, along with a promise that all Alderaanian refugees would be welcomed regardless of their ability to contribute militarily. "We understand your loss," the message concluded. "Let us help you transform grief into action." I stared at that message for a long time. Everything I'd believed, everything Alderaan stood for, rejected violence as a tool of change. But what good had our principles done? We had been defenseless, had relied on our cultural significance and moral authority to protect us, and we had been annihilated without mercy or hesitation. The Empire had made a calculation. The propaganda value of demonstrating absolute power outweighed any diplomatic or cultural cost. They had been correct. No one had come to our aid. No one had stopped them. The Senate had issued statements of concern and moved on to other business. Princess Leia, held prisoner aboard the Death Star, forced to watch her homeworld die, had been released and immediately joined the rebellion. If she, the crown princess of Alderaan, the embodiment of our peaceful traditions, had chosen armed resistance, what right did I have to cling to pacifism? But I could not bring myself to take that step. Not yet. I was a musician, not a soldier. The thought of holding a weapon, of deliberately taking a life, was so alien to everything I had been taught that it felt like contemplating self-mutilation. And yet, I needed somewhere to go. I needed a purpose, or I would simply drift until my credits ran out and I starved or froze or found some other anonymous end. So I made a compromise. I would go to Yavin 4, accept the Alliance's offer of refuge, but I would not fight. I would find some other way to contribute, some role that did not require me to become something I was not. The journey to Yavin 4 took 6 days, traveling on a rebel supply ship that Captain Valo had connected me with. The ship was cramped, poorly maintained, its hyperdrive making concerning sounds that the crew assured me were normal. There were 30 other passengers, most of them refugees from Imperial persecution, dissidents, suspected rebel sympathizers, people who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Many were injured. I found myself helping the ship's medic, a tired Twi'lek woman named Neva, treat blaster burns and broken bones and the psychological trauma of displacement. I had no medical training, but I could follow instructions, could hold instruments and bandages, could sit with the frightened and the dying, and offer what comfort I could. Neva worked without rest, moving from patient to patient with efficient compassion. During a brief pause, I asked her why she had joined the rebellion. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. My village on Ryloth was destroyed by Imperial forces hunting rebel sympathizers. They killed 300 people to catch 5. My family, my friends, my students. I was a teacher before. All gone. Like you, Alderaanian, like you. She returned to her work, and I understood. We were all fragments of broken worlds, all survivors of Imperial brutality, all searching for meaning in the ashes. Yavin 4 was a jungle moon, hot and humid, the air thick with moisture and the scent of decaying vegetation. The rebel base was carved into an ancient temple, its stone walls covered with carvings from the long-extinct Masasi civilization. It was both awe-inspiring and claustrophobic, the sense of history pressing down, the knowledge that we were hiding in ruins, that we were the latest iteration of a cycle of civilizations that rose and fell and left only stones behind. The base was crowded with fighters, technicians, strategists, and refugees like myself. I was processed, given a bunk in a converted storage chamber, assigned a meal schedule and work rotation. The work they offered me was exactly what I had hoped for: logistics support in the medical bay. I would not fight, but I could help treat the wounded. It seemed like a reasonable compromise, maintaining my principles while still contributing to the community that had taken me in. For the first few weeks, the work was manageable. I organized supplies, cleaned surgical instruments, assisted with patient transport. The medics appreciated the extra hands, and I felt useful in a way I had not since Alderaan's destruction. But then came the Battle of Scarif. I did not know the details at the time, would not learn until much later that it was a desperate operation to steal the Death Star plans, that it had cost dozens of rebel lives, that it had been the opening move in a campaign that would ultimately lead to the battle station's destruction. All I knew was that suddenly the medical bay was overwhelmed with casualties. Burned, broken, dying. The smell hit me first, cauterized flesh from blaster wounds, the sharp tang of bacta, the coppery scent of blood. So much blood. The sounds, screaming, moaning, the desperate urgency in the medics' voices as they triaged. The flatline alarms that signaled another life lost. Never grabbed my arm. "I need you in surgery. Now." I followed her to an operating table where a young man lay, his left side a mass of burnt tissue from a thermal detonator. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Next to him on another table was an Imperial soldier, still in his armor, a blaster wound through his abdomen. Never looked at me. "I can't handle both. You take the Imperial. Keep pressure on the wound, monitor his vitals. Do exactly what I tell you." I stared at her. "I'm not a doctor. I don't—" "You will, or he dies. Your choice." I moved to the Imperial's table. His armor had been partially removed, revealing a pale torso slick with blood. The wound was just below his ribcage, the edges charred black from the blaster's heat. His eyes were open, unfocused but aware. He was maybe 20 years old, with short dark hair and a scar across his chin. He looked terrified. I applied pressure to the wound as Neva had shown me, feeling the warm blood pulse against my palms. He gasped, his eyes finding mine. "Am I going to die?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "You're going to be fine." Neva shouted instructions from the other table, and I followed them mechanically. Administered painkillers, cleaned the wound, cauterized bleeding vessels with a surgical laser. My hands shook. The smell of burning flesh intensified, mixed with the metallic taste of my own fear. The Imperial, his name I learned later, was Corin Wise, gripped my arm. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for not letting me die." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask if he had been aboard the Death Star, if he had participated in Alderaan's destruction, if he understood that his uniform represented everything I'd lost. Instead, I smiled and said, "You're welcome." He survived. So did the rebel. I stumbled out of the medical bay after 18 hours of continuous work. My uniform soaked with blood and sweat and other fluids I did not want to identify. I made it to my bunk, closed the curtain, and wept. I had saved an Imperial soldier, a member of the military machine that had murdered 2 billion people, that had reduced my homeworld to rubble, that continued to oppress and brutalize across the galaxy. How could I? How could I hold his hand and comfort him and use my skills to preserve his life? Neva found me an hour later. She sat on the edge of my bunk, handed me a flask of something strong that burned going down. "First time?" she asked. I nodded. "You did well. You saved a life." "He was Imperial," I said. "I saved an enemy." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "We treat everyone. Rebel, Imperial, civilian, combatant. We're medics. If we start choosing who deserves care based on their allegiance, we become no better than them. Alderaan believed in compassion, didn't it? In the value of every life. Alderaan is dead," I said bitterly. "Those beliefs didn't save us." "No," she agreed. "But maybe they can save you." I wanted to believe her. I tried to rationalize what I had done. I was a healer, not a combatant. Helping the wounded was different from fighting. It was maintaining my principles, honoring Alderaan's values even in the midst of war. But a crack had formed in my certainty, and over the following months, that crack would widen into a chasm. Because the truth I could not escape was that by helping rebel medics treat casualties, by enabling them to return to combat, I was participating in the war effort. My pacifism was an illusion, a comfortable lie I told myself to avoid confronting what I had become. 6 weeks after Scarif, the Death Star was destroyed. The news came in the middle of the night, transmitted across rebel channels with jubilation. Princess Leia had been rescued, the battle station's weakness identified. A small force of X-Wings had exploited a thermal exhaust port and triggered a chain reaction that obliterated the entire structure. I listened to the celebrations, the cheers, the tears of relief, the sense that finally, the Empire had been dealt a blow it could not ignore and felt nothing. 1 million people had died aboard the Death Star. Engineers, officers, pilots, crew, and yes, soldiers like Koran Wise. All dead, atomized, just like Alderaan. I should have felt satisfaction, revenge, justice served. Instead, I felt empty. The Death Star's destruction did not bring back my family, my friends, my world. It was simply another tragedy added to an already incomprehensible total. That night I requested a transfer to Echo Base on Hoth, as far from the celebrations as I could get. The Alliance approved the transfer without question. There was always a need for medical personnel, especially in the remote outposts. I left Yavin 4 without saying goodbye to anyone, carrying only a small bag of belongings and the growing certainty that the person I had been on Alderaan was as dead as the planet itself. Echo Base was a different kind of hell. Built into the ice caverns of Hoth's frozen wastes, it was perpetually cold, the kind of deep chill that seeped into your bones and never left. I arrived 8 months after Alderaan's destruction, and I barely recognized myself. I had lost 10 kilograms, my body consuming itself in the absence of proper appetite. My hands shook when I tried to play music, so I had stopped trying. Sleep came in fits. Never more than 4 hours at a stretch, always interrupted by nightmares. The green beam, the planets shattering, faces of people I loved frozen in the moment of their deaths. The medical bay at Echo Base was smaller than Yavin's, but busier. The cold caused constant casualties, frostbite, hypothermia, equipment failures that led to injuries. And there were the patrols, rebels sent out into the frozen wastes to watch for Imperial scouts, to establish sensor networks, to hunt wampus that threatened the base. They came back injured, exhausted, traumatized by the isolation and the cold. I treated them all. My hands steady now from months of practice, my heart encased in ice thicker than anything Hoth could produce. Document Microsoft Word .docs. What had horrified me on Yavin became routine. Amputations. Fingers, toes, entire limbs lost to frostbite or blaster fire. I learned to cut cleanly, to cauterize effectively, to ignore the screams. I learned which painkillers worked fastest, which patients would survive, and which were already dead but their bodies had not realized it yet. I learned to eat my meals while surrounded by suffering, to sleep while wounded men and women cried out in the darkness, to function in an environment where death was the constant companion and life was the fragile exception. The moral erosion was imperceptible, like ice melting one molecule at a time. I told myself I was still adhering to my principles. I was healing, not harming. But the definitions shifted. When I held down a thrashing patient so never could perform surgery without anesthesia, we were running low, had to ration it for the worst cases. Was I healing or causing pain? When I trained new medics in combat triage, teaching them how to decide who lived and who died when resources were scarce, was I saving lives or condemning those deemed unsavable? The lines blurred until I could no longer see them. I met Ray Carson 6 months into my time on Hoth. I was in the commissary, forcing down a meal of lukewarm stew and stale bread, when someone sat across from me. Lyra Antilles. I looked up and saw a face I had not seen in years. A fellow student from the conservatory, a violinist who had specialized in classical Alderaanian compositions. He looked older, we all did, but his eyes were what caught me. They were empty, void of the spark I remembered from our school days. "Ray," I said, "you survived." "If you can call it that," he replied. He was thin, wiry, his hands scarred and calloused in ways that had nothing to do with music. "I'm a sniper now, 73rd Division, good at it too, 47 confirmed kills." The way he said it, flat, factual, as if reciting a shopping list, sent a chill through me colder than Hoth's atmosphere. We talked, or rather, we exchanged information in the way of survivors who have learned that emotional vulnerability is a luxury. He told me about his escape from Alderaan. He had been on a transport heading to Corellia when the news came through, and his subsequent recruitment by the rebellion. They asked if I wanted to fight. I said yes. What else was there? He looked at his scarred hands. "I haven't played music since. Can't. Every time I touch an instrument, I see their faces. My mother, my brother, all of them. So I pick up a rifle instead, and I kill the people who took them away." "Do you feel anything?" I asked. "When you kill them?" He met my eyes, and I saw my own reflection. The emptiness, the numbness, the sense of going through motions long after meaning has been extracted. "No," he said. "Nothing." "Do you?" I thought about Corin Wise, the Imperial soldier I had saved. Thought about the others I had treated. Some rebel, some Imperial, all equally human in their suffering. Thought about the growing callousness in my own chest, the way I could look at a dying patient and calculate survival chances with no emotional response. "No," I said. "Nothing." Ray shipped out the next day for a mission in the Outer Rim. I never saw him again. The casualty reports 3 weeks later listed him among the dead, killed in a firefight on Tatooine. I felt a distant sadness, like hearing about a stranger's death, and then I returned to work. What else was there? The months blurred together, differentiated only by the changing roster of wounded and dead, until the day they brought in a piece of Alderaan. A salvage team had been exploring the asteroid field, the graveyard that had been my home world, and recovered a fragment of the royal palace. It was brought to Echo Base as a symbol of Alderaanian resilience, displayed in the main corridor where everyone could see it. I stood before it for hours, unable to move. It was a piece of wall, maybe 2 meters by 1 meter, made of the distinctive blue-veined marble that had been quarried in the Caldera Mountains. I knew that marble. Had walked past walls made of it every day on my way to the conservatory. Had traced my fingers along its smooth surface while waiting for classes to start. Had pressed my forehead against its cool stone during moments of frustration or doubt. Now it was a memorial, a grave marker for a world. I reached out, touched the stone, felt its familiar texture, and something inside me broke. I wept for the first time since that initial shock aboard the Stellar Wanderer. Wept with a violence that frightened me. Great racking sobs that came from somewhere so deep I had not known it existed. Other Alderaanians gathered around me. There were 23 of us at Echo Base, and we held each other and wept together, our grief finally finding release. When it was done, when I had no more tears left, I felt hollow, empty. Purged not just of grief, but of everything. I looked at the marble fragment one last time, then walked away. The dead were dead. Grief would not resurrect them, only revenge made sense now. But what did revenge mean? The Death Star was destroyed. Did that balance the scales? Did 1 million Imperial deaths equal 2 billion Alderaanian lives? And if not, what would? How many would I have to kill, personally, directly, before I could say justice had been served? The mathematics of it were obscene, impossible. I could spend my entire life killing Imperials and never approach a fraction of what had been taken from me. So what was the point? These were the questions that consumed me as I worked through my shifts, as I saved lives and watched others slip away. As I became increasingly efficient at the mechanics of medicine while losing touch with its purpose. The Battle of Hoth came 14 months after Alderaan's destruction. I was in the medical bay when the alarms sounded. Imperial forces had found the base, were launching a ground assault. AT-ATs, massive walkers, were advancing across the ice plains, supported by snow troopers and TIE fighters. The evacuation order came swiftly. All non-essential personnel to the transports, medics to remain until the last possible moment to treat casualties. I stayed, along with Neva and 3 other medics, working frantically as wounded poured in from the trenches. The walls shook with impacts. Ice fell from the ceiling. The power flickered. And still, we worked. A rebel soldier was brought in, his legs crushed by fallen debris. As I administered pain medication and prepared him for transport, he grabbed my arm. "Are we winning?" he asked. I looked at his ruined legs, thought about the base being evacuated, the rebels fleeing once again from Imperial might. "Yes," I lied. "We're winning." He smiled and closed his eyes. He died before we could get him to a transport. I left his body and moved to the next patient. There was no time for grief, for reflection, for anything but the immediate task of keeping people alive long enough to evacuate. We were among the last to leave, escaping aboard a damaged transport that barely made it off-planet before the base fell. I watched through a viewport as Hoth receded, the white expanse marked with the black scars of battle, the wreckage of our defenses scattered across the ice. Another defeat. Another retreat. The pattern was numbingly familiar. Establish a base. Build hope. Get discovered. Flee. How long could we continue? How many more echo bases would fall before the Empire finally crushed us completely? These questions felt less urgent than they should have. I was too tired to care. The Alliance regrouped, scattered across dozens of ships and remote outposts. I was assigned to a medical frigate called Hope of Alderaan, a ship funded and crewed primarily by Alderaanian survivors, dedicated to providing medical care to rebel forces across the Outer Rim. It was cramped, understaffed, constantly short on supplies, but it was something resembling purpose. I was promoted to senior medic, responsible for training new personnel and coordinating treatment protocols. The work was endless, and I was grateful for it. When I worked, I did not think. When I did not think, I did not feel. Numbness became a survival strategy. Time passed, marked by battles and casualties rather than seasons or holidays. The Alliance scored victories, Endor, the Emperor's death, the second Death Star's destruction, but the Empire did not collapse. It fragmented into warlord territories, Imperial remnants that clung to power and continued to oppress. The war continued, just with different players and shifting front lines. And I continued to work, to save lives, to watch people die, to exist in the narrow space between hope and despair that all survivors inhabit. Then came Kessel. 18 months after Endor, Alliance intelligence located an Imperial prison camp on Kessel, a facility where political prisoners and captured rebels were being held in horrific conditions. A liberation operation was mounted. Small, surgical, designed to extract the prisoners before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. The Hope of Alderaan was part of the support fleet, ready to provide immediate medical care to freed prisoners who would likely be in desperate condition. I volunteered for the landing team. After years of treating casualties in the safety of bases and ships, some part of me wanted to see the source, to witness firsthand the cruelty I'd spent so long trying to repair. The prison was worse than I had imagined. Built into Kessel's spice mines, it was a labyrinth of tunnels carved from living rock, the air thick with dust and the chemical tang of glitterstim. The prisoners were skeletal, filthy, many bearing signs of torture. Burns, broken bones poorly healed, the blank stares of profound trauma. We moved through the facility, rebel commandos securing each section while my medical team assessed the prisoners and marked those needing immediate evacuation. The dead were everywhere, left where they had fallen, their bodies mummified by the dry atmosphere. I stepped over them, focusing on the living, the ones we could still save. In the facility's administration center, the rebels captured several Imperial officers who had not fled with the evacuating garrison. Most were low-level functionaries, bureaucrats who had processed the paperwork that documented suffering. But one man stood out. Colonel Davin Tern, a logistics officer who had served aboard the Death Star during its initial operations. His personnel file, hastily pulled from the facility's computers, showed he had been responsible for coordinating supply chains and resource allocation, including, the file noted with bureaucratic precision, his role in the Alderaan pacification operation. I stood in the doorway, watching as rebel soldiers secured Tern's hands behind his back. He was maybe 50 years old, gray hair at his temples, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He wore his Imperial uniform with careful precision despite the chaos, the rank insignia polished, the creases sharp. He looked like someone's grandfather, someone who might have spent his career shuffling data pads and attending meetings, making decisions that affected millions of lives from the comfortable distance of statistics and strategic projections. Commander Jarrus, leading the rebel team, approached me. "You're Alderaanian, right?" I nodded. He gestured to Tern. "He helped kill your world. Testimony says he coordinated the Death Star's operations, including targeting priorities. Thought you'd want to know we got him. He'll stand trial, answer for what he did." I looked at Tern, and our eyes met. He did not look away, did not show fear or remorse. "Alderaan was harboring rebel leadership," he said, his voice steady. "Princess Leia was a confirmed traitor. The decision to neutralize a strategic threat was militarily sound. We did what was necessary." Something in me snapped. Not dramatically. There was no rage, no shouted accusations. It was quieter than that, more fundamental. A barrier that had held for 18 months simply ceased to exist. I walked toward Tern, my hand sliding to the medical kit at my belt, fingers finding the scalpel I used for emergency surgery. The blade was sharp, surgically precise, capable of cutting through tissue with minimal resistance. One slash across the carotid artery, I knew exactly where it was, had treated enough throat wounds to map the anatomy in my sleep, and he would bleed out in under a minute. Justice, revenge, closure. I stood in front of him. The scalpel was hidden in my palm, positioned for the strike. No one was paying attention. The rebels were securing other prisoners, cataloging evidence, managing the chaos of liberation. It would be easy. So easy. And who would blame me? I was an Alderaanian facing one of the men who had destroyed my world. Self-defense could be claimed, or temporary insanity, or simply the understanding that some acts of revenge are justified by their magnitude. Tern looked at me, and I saw that he understood what I was considering. He said nothing, but his throat worked as he swallowed, the skin stretching over his carotid. Such a fragile target. 2 billion lives demanded this. My family demanded this. Every student I had taught, every colleague I had worked with, every stranger I had passed on Alderaanian streets, they all demanded this small, inadequate gesture toward justice. My hand tightened on the scalpel, and I saw my reflection in the polished wall panel behind him. A stranger looked back, gaunt, hollow-eyed, dressed in blood-stained medical scrubs, holding a weapon. Not a healer, not a musician, not an Alderaanian committed to peace and dialogue. A killer, someone who had been so transformed by loss that murder seemed reasonable, even necessary. Someone my parents would not recognize, my sister would not recognize. I did not recognize. The scalpel fell from my hand, clattering on the stone floor. I stepped back. Commander Jarrus turned, saw the scalpel, saw my face. His expression shifted to understanding. He picked up the blade, handed it back to me. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "No one would have stopped you." "I know," I said. That was the problem. Tern was taken into custody, transported to a rebel holding facility to await trial. I returned to the Hope of Alderaan and spent the night staring at my hands. They were marked with scars from 2 years of medical work, burns from cauterizing lasers, cuts from broken glass and sharp instruments, calluses from endless hours of surgery. They had saved 1,247 lives. I kept count, needed to know that my existence had purpose beyond simply continuing. But they had almost taken a life too, almost crossed a line that, once crossed, would have redefined everything. Who was I? Not the music teacher from Alderaan. She was dead, killed along with the planet. Not a healer, not truly, because healers did not fantasize about murder. Not a rebel, because I had never taken up arms. I existed in some liminal space, neither the person I had been nor the person circumstances demanded I become. An Alderaanian without Alderaan, a pacifist working for a military organization, a musician who had forgotten how to play, a survivor, which was perhaps the only identity that fit, someone who continued to exist not out of desire, but simple momentum. A month later, Turn's trial began. It was held aboard Home 1, the massive Mon Calamari star cruiser that served as Alliance headquarters. The trial was public, broadcast across rebel networks, intended to demonstrate that the Alliance valued justice and due process, even for its enemies. Prosecutors presented evidence of Turn's role in Imperial atrocities, focusing particularly on his involvement with the Death Star. Defense advocates, appointed under Alliance law, which guaranteed even war criminals legal representation, argued that Turn had been following orders, that individual soldiers could not be held responsible for strategic decisions made by high command, that punishing him would set a dangerous precedent for collective guilt. The arguments washed over me. I sat in the observer's gallery, one of 23 Alderaanian survivors who had come to witness the proceedings, and listened to lawyers debate the ethics of genocide as if it were an abstract philosophical problem. At one point, the defense presented calculations. The Death Star's crew numbered over 1 million people. If all were considered complicit in Alderaan's destruction, where did responsibility end? With the gunner who fired the super laser? The engineer who maintained its systems? The cook who fed the engineer? The bureaucrat who processed the cook's payroll? The lead prosecutor, a Bothan named Kravik, called me to testify. I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the Alliance emblem as required, and swore to tell the truth. Kravik's questions were straightforward. Describe life on Alderaan, describe my experience learning of its destruction, describe my subsequent experiences as a survivor. I answered mechanically, reciting facts while something inside me observed from a distance. Then he asked the question that mattered. Miss Antilles, as a survivor of Alderaan's destruction and someone who has dedicated herself to healing, what would you have this court do with Colonel Turn? The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on me. Turn sat at the defense table, his expression carefully neutral. I looked at him, then at the panel of judges, then at my hands, scarred, trembling slightly, the hands that had almost killed him. I don't know, I said finally. I don't know what justice looks like when 2 billion people are dead. Execute him? That won't bring them back. Imprison him? That won't undo what was done. He's one man among millions who participated in that atrocity. Punishing him feels simultaneously essential and utterly meaningless. Kravik persisted. But surely you believe he should face consequences. Of course, I said. But what consequences fit the crime? How do you balance 2 billion deaths against one life? The mathematics don't work. I paused, gathering thoughts that felt slippery, elusive. Alderaan believed in rehabilitation over retribution, in the power of education and culture to transform even the most hardened criminals. But Alderaan is gone, destroyed by people who rejected those beliefs. If I demand Turn's death, I betray what Alderaan stood for. If I ask for mercy, I betray the memory of everyone who died. Either choice is a betrayal. The defense attorney, a human woman named Dessa Price, seized on this. So you agree that Colonel Turn's guilt is ambiguous, that he was simply a soldier following orders? No, I said sharply. His guilt is absolute. He participated knowingly in genocide. The ambiguity is in what we do about it, not whether it happened. I turned to address Tern directly. You said Alderaan was harboring rebels, that destroying it was militarily necessary. Even if that were true, and Princess Leia's supposed treachery hardly justifies 2 billion deaths, you made a choice. You could have refused. You could have sabotaged the operation. You could have warned us. You did none of those things because it was easier to follow orders, easier to tell yourself you were just doing your job. That's not ambiguity. That's moral cowardice. Tern stood. The guards moved to restrain him, but the head judge gestured for them to allow it. You're right, Tern said. I could have done those things. I could have thrown away my career, probably my life, to warn a planet that was going to be destroyed regardless. The Death Star was operational. The order had been given. Whether I participated or not, Alderaan would have died. So yes, I chose the path of self-preservation, as did millions of others in the Imperial military, as I suspect you would have done in my position. I would not have been in your position, I said, because I would never have joined an organization that built weapons of planetary annihilation. Wouldn't you? He gestured around the courtroom. You work for the rebellion. You treat wounded fighters so they can return to combat. You're part of a military organization that conducts operations resulting in Imperial deaths. The Death Star housed over 1 million people. Soldiers, yes, but also technicians, bureaucrats, civilians. All dead when your alliance destroyed it. Are you a mass murderer too, Miss Antilles? The comparison was false, obscene, and yet it struck something deep in me. Because there was a kernel of truth in it, I had compromised my principles. I had become part of a military machine, however justified its cause. I had saved rebel fighters who went on to kill Imperial soldiers. My hands were not clean. No one's hands were clean in this galaxy of endless war. The difference, I said slowly, is that the Death Star was designed to destroy planets. Your weapon had no purpose except mass murder. The rebellion destroys military targets in pursuit of liberation. The scale and intent matter. Intent, Tern repeated. So if my intent had been noble, say, believing that the Empire truly brought order and peace, that Alderaan's destruction was a regrettable necessity to prevent greater suffering, that would absolve me? No, I said. But it would make you deluded rather than evil, though at this scale, the distinction hardly matters. The judge intervened, ending our exchange, but the questions Tern raised haunted me. How different was I from him? We had both compromised our morals in service of causes we believed justified. We had both rationalized participation in violence. The main difference was that I had stopped short of murder, but that line seemed thinner than I wanted to admit. The trial continued for 3 more days. Witnesses testified to Tern's competence and conscientiousness as an officer, his lack of sadistic tendencies or particular cruelty. He had simply been good at his job, and his job had been facilitating planetary genocide. The prosecution presented intercepted communications showing Tern had known exactly what the Death Star's purpose was, had expressed no reservations about its use. The defense countered that doubt and reservations were dangerous in a military dictatorships, that absence of protest did not equal enthusiastic support. Finally, the judges delivered their verdict. Guilty of war crimes, complicit in genocide, sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Not death, as many Alderaanians had demanded, but not freedom either. A compromise that satisfied no one. After the verdict, the lead judge asked if I had any final statement. I stood, my legs unsteady, and addressed the court. I don't want him executed. I don't want him simply imprisoned and forgotten. I want him to spend the rest of his life working to rebuild what he helped destroy, teaching future generations about the cost of genocide, working with refugees, doing the unglamorous, exhausting work of redemption. Let him live with what he's done, as I have to live with being a survivor. Let him carry that weight every day. The court considered my recommendation. After deliberation, they modified the sentence. Tern would serve his life sentence through supervised labor with refugee assistance programs, required to document his experiences and participate in educational initiatives about Imperial atrocities. It was an unusual sentence, controversial, criticized by both those who wanted harsher punishment and those who felt any punishment was unjust collective guilt. I received messages from other Alderaanian survivors calling me a traitor, too soft, a disgrace to our world's memory. Others called me wise, merciful, a true representative of Alderaanian values. I felt neither vindicated nor ashamed. I had made a choice in an impossible situation, and I would live with it as I lived with everything else. One day at a time, carrying weight that never diminished. 3 days after the trial, I returned to the Hope of Alderaan and resumed my duties. The medical bay needed restocking. Wounded were waiting. The work continued as it always did. The irony arrived 11 months later in a terse casualty report. Colonel Davin Tern, killed when the transport carrying him and medical supplies to a refugee camp on Ryloth suffered a hyperdrive malfunction and crashed. 23 people dead, including Tern, 2 rebel guards, and 14 refugees. An accident, pure chance, the random cruelty of a universe that cared nothing for our notions of justice or redemption. The revenge I had rejected, that I had chosen to transform into something more meaningful, had found him anyway through the impersonal machinery of fate. I read the report twice, then filed it away. I felt nothing. His death changed nothing. Alderaan was still gone. 2 billion people were still dead. One more death in a galaxy drowning in death was a rounding error, meaningless. That night, I tried to play music for the first time in 2 years. I borrowed a halixet from one of the crew, sat alone in my cabin, and placed my fingers on the strings. The muscle memory was still there, the technical knowledge intact, but when I tried to play a simple Alderaanian folk melody, something I had known since childhood, my hands froze. The music was gone, not the ability, but the connection to it. I could no more play that halixet than I could resurrect Alderaan. The person who had loved music, who had built her life around it, who had believed in its power to bridge divides and elevate consciousness. That person was dead. I set the instrument aside and never touched one again. 5 years after Alderaan's destruction, 5 ABY, as the new calendar designated it, measuring time from the Battle of Yavin rather than the Republic's founding or the Empire's rise. I stood in the medical bay of the Hope of Alderaan and looked at my reflection in a supply cabinet's polished surface. I was 33 years old and looked 50. My weight had stabilized at 54 kilograms on a frame that had once carried 68. Gray streaks ran through my hair, premature aging from stress and poor nutrition. A scar ran down my left forearm from an accident with a broken container of Bacta. The burn had been deep, the supplies too precious to waste on myself, so I had treated it minimally and let it heal badly. My hands, those instruments that had once coaxed beauty from strings and keys, were now utilitarian tools, scarred, calloused, the nails kept ruthlessly short. I had saved 1,932 lives in 5 years. I kept meticulous count, needed that number to justify my continued existence. It was not enough, would never be enough, but it was something. Each life saved was a small act of defiance against the Empire's cruelty, against the Death Star's legacy, against the entropy that seemed to define this era. The Hope of Alderaan operated in the Outer Rim now, traveling from system to system, providing medical care to communities devastated by the Imperial collapse and subsequent warlord conflicts. The Empire's fragmentation had not brought peace. If anything, the fighting had intensified as various factions competed for resources and territory. We treated casualties from all sides. Rebel soldiers, Imperial remnants, civilians caught in crossfire, refugees fleeing violence. My original conviction that I would not participate in the war had dissolved completely. I was part of the war irrevocably, and pretending otherwise was simply another comfortable lie. But I had found something resembling equilibrium. Not peace, never peace, but a sustainable way of existing. I worked 18-hour shifts, slept dreamlessly through exhaustion, woke and repeated. I no longer had nightmares about Alderaan's destruction. The images had worn smooth through repetition, lost their power to wound. I rarely thought about my family except in abstract terms, data points in the calculus of loss. Emotional distance was necessary for survival. Getting close to anyone, caring too deeply about anything, opened vulnerabilities I could not afford. The crew of the Hope of Alderaan learned to give me space. I was respected for my competence and dedication, but no one would call me a friend. I attended crew gatherings only when required, spoke only when necessary, maintained professional boundaries that kept everyone at arm's length. It was easier this way. Safer. I'd lost everyone I loved once. I would not give the universe another opportunity. Then came Jakku, the final battle of the Galactic Civil War. Though we did not know it at the time, the New Republic and Imperial remnant clashed over a worthless desert world, turning it into a graveyard of starships and a testament to the futility of continued conflict. We arrived 3 days after the battle, part of a relief convoy bringing medical supplies and personnel to treat survivors. The devastation was staggering. Crashed star destroyers half buried in sand, debris fields stretching for kilometers, bodies scattered like broken toys. We established a field hospital in the remains of a downed transport, treating anyone who came to us. Most were civilians, scavengers who had been trapped in the battle, locals whose settlements had been destroyed, refugees who had been on ships when they were shot down. An 8-year-old girl was brought to me, found wandering in the desert, severely dehydrated and incoherent. She had no identification, no family, no memory of how she had ended up alone in the wastes. I treated her physical injuries, dehydration, malnutrition, minor radiation exposure, and waited for her to speak. It took 3 days. She sat in the recovery area, staring at nothing, unresponsive to questions or comfort. Other survivors came and went, were treated and released or transported to more equipped facilities. But the girl remained silent and still as a statue. On the 3rd evening, I sat beside her, not saying anything, just present. She turned to me suddenly, her eyes focusing as if seeing me for the first time. "Where are my parents?" she asked, her voice small and cracked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "We're trying to find them. Can you tell me your name?" She thought for a long moment. "I don't remember." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't remember anything. Who am I?" I had no answer for her. We never found her parents. Likely they were among the thousands killed in the battle, their bodies lost in the desert or vaporized in ship explosions. The girl, we called her Kira because she needed a name, became one of thousands of war orphans, children whose identities had been erased by violence, who would grow up not knowing where they came from or who they might have been. I arranged for Kira to be transferred to a refugee center on Coruscant, one of the better facilities where she might have a chance at something resembling a normal life. Before she left, she hugged me, her small arms wrapping around my waist. "Thank you for helping me," she whispered. I stood rigid, unable to return the embrace, unable to offer false comfort about her future. When she pulled away, she looked confused by my lack of response, hurt flickering across her face before she schooled it into blankness. Learning already, so young to guard her emotions. I watched her transport leave, a small figure in the viewport, and felt something crack in the ice around my heart. She was 8 years old, the same age I'd been when I first performed in the conservatory's recital hall, playing a simple piece for my parents, feeling their pride radiating from the audience. Kira would never have that. Would never know if her parents had been proud of her, what traditions they had hoped to pass down, what songs they had sung to her. Her entire heritage, her connection to the past, severed as cleanly as if by a blade. She was me, I realized. We were all Kira, survivors stumbling through the wreckage of our lives, trying to remember who we had been before everything burned. Alderaan's destruction had been uniquely catastrophic in scale, but the pattern repeated endlessly across the galaxy. Every war produced orphans and refugees, people torn from their contexts and cast adrift. The Empire had perfected the process, but they had not invented it, and their fall had not ended it. That night, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to remember Alderaan not as an abstraction, but as a lived reality. I remembered morning tea on my balcony, the specific way the light fell across the city at dawn. I remembered my sister's laugh, her habit of pulling her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. I remembered my father's hands, weathered from working with soil, gentle when he turned the pages of books. I remembered my mother's voice, reading poetry in the old Alderaanian dialect that few people spoke anymore. I remembered my students, each one distinct. Mira's determination, Yaxen's creativity, Ren's sensitivity. The memories were agonizing, each one a fresh wound. I had kept them locked away because experiencing them meant experiencing the loss, the absence, the reality that all those people and moments were gone forever. But I realized that forgetting was its own betrayal. Alderaan lived only in memory now, only in the minds of survivors. When we died, it would die again. Finally and completely. The culture, the art, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years, all of it would vanish as if it had never existed. I could not prevent that final death, but I could delay it. I could remember. I could document. I could ensure that at least some fragment of what Alderaan had been would survive in records and testimonies. It was inadequate, a fraction of what should be preserved, but it was something. The next morning, I began recording my memories. I spoke into a recorder for hours, describing everything I could recall about Alderaan: geography, architecture, customs, music, food, festivals, daily rhythms, the 1,000 tiny details that made up a civilization. Other Alderaanian survivors on the Hope of Alderaan joined me, each adding their perspectives, their memories. We created an archive, stored on multiple data crystals and distributed to historical societies and libraries across the New Republic. It would never capture what Alderaan had truly been. No archive could contain the lived experience of a world, but future historians would at least have primary sources, would know that we had existed, had mattered, had been more than a tragic footnote in the Empire's crimes. This work became my new purpose. I continued my medical duties, but in spare moments I recorded, transcribed, organized. I interviewed other survivors, collected their stories, preserved their testimonies. Some could barely speak about Alderaan. Others, like me, found catharsis in remembering. Together, we built a monument of words, a memorial constructed from language and memory. 7 years after Alderaan's destruction, I received a message from Ray Carson's brother, whom I had never met. Ray had left a collection of recordings before his death, music he had composed in the years after Alderaan fell. His brother thought I should have them, as a fellow musician, as someone who would understand. I listened to the recordings in my cabin. Alone, lights dimmed. The music was unlike anything Ray had composed in his student days. It was discordant, fractured, built from fragments of Alderaanian melodies twisted into something anguished and raw. It was the sound of grief given form, of rage and despair, and bitter determination. It was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I wept listening to it. For Ray, who had transformed his pain into art, even as it destroyed him. For myself, who had lost the ability to do the same. For everyone who had survived Alderaan's destruction and been forced to become people they never wanted to be. The music ended, and I sat in silence, and I understood that I would never create again. That part of me was truly dead, but perhaps that was acceptable. Perhaps some wounds should not heal, some losses should not be overcome. Perhaps the most honest response to genocide was to carry the scar forever, to refuse the comfort of moving on. Now, standing in the medical bay, I prepare for another day. Another shift of treating injuries and illnesses, of preserving life in a galaxy that seems determined to extinguish it. Outside the viewport, stars stream past in hyperspace, each one potentially hosting worlds where people live and love and build civilizations that could be destroyed as easily as Alderaan was. The New Republic has banned weapons of planetary destruction, has built safeguards meant to prevent another Death Star. But I have no faith in safeguards. I have seen how quickly civilization can be obliterated, how fragile our constructions are, how easily the unthinkable becomes reality. My hands shake slightly as I prepare instruments for surgery. Minor tremors from nerve damage, from years of repetitive stress. I am 35 years old and my body is already wearing out, consumed by the intensity of the work I use to avoid thinking, to avoid feeling. How much longer can I continue? 5 years, 10, and what happens after? There is no retirement for survivors, no peaceful ending. We simply continue until we cannot, and then we stop. A young medic, recently assigned to the Hope of Alderaan, approaches with a question about sterilization protocols. His name is Tomas. He is 19. He joined the rebellion at 16 after his homeworld suffered an Imperial crackdown. He is earnest, dedicated, still believes the New Republic will create lasting peace. I answer his question, watch him return to work and envy his optimism, even as I know it will be ground away by experience. The galaxy does not reward optimism. It rewards endurance. The ability to continue functioning after everything that made you human has been stripped away. The ship drops out of hyperspace. We have arrived at our destination. A mining colony in the outer rim that requested medical assistance. There was a collapse in one of the deep mines, dozens injured or dead, inadequate local facilities. Standard crisis, standard response. I gather my team, check our supplies, prepare for another day of triage and trauma. This is my life now, will be my life until it ends. Traveling from disaster to disaster, treating wounds I cannot heal, saving people who will likely die in the next crisis. It is not what I imagined on Alderaan, in my apartment overlooking the royal palace, drinking Castilian tea and preparing lectures on musical theory. That person, with her naive beliefs about civilization and peace and the power of art, is as dead as the 2 billion others. What remains is this scarred, exhausted shell, animated by momentum and the grim determination to witness, to remember, to testify. I am Lyra Antilles. I am 35 years old. I weigh 54 kilograms. I have saved 1,932 lives. I have lost everything that mattered, and I continue. The mining colony appears on the view screen as we approach. A cluster of prefabricated structures clinging to an asteroid, the mining shafts descending into darkness. Already I can see the damage. Collapsed structures, debris, the emergency lights pulsing. The comm system crackles with desperate requests for assistance. My team moves efficiently, years of practice making our movements synchronized. We dock, disembark, enter a scene of chaos and suffering that has become numbingly familiar. A man with a crushed leg begs me to save the limb. I assess the damage. Compound fracture, vascular compromise, infection already setting in, and tell him the truth, amputation or death. He weeps. I prepare the surgical field. A woman holds her dying husband, his injuries too severe for our capabilities. I administer painkillers, all I can offer. She asks me to pray with her. I do not tell her I stopped praying when Alderaan died. Instead, I hold her hand while her husband's breathing slows and stops. A child, maybe 6 years old, sits amid the wreckage, covered in dust, staring at nothing. I recognize that expression. Shock, trauma, the mind's protective shutdown when reality becomes unbearable. I clean her wounds, check for injuries, speak softly, though I do not know if she hears. She reminds me of Kira, of all the children this galaxy has broken. What will become of her? Another orphan, another damaged soul carrying wounds that will never fully heal. Hours pass in a blur of blood and pain and desperate efforts. We save some, we lose others. The mathematics of triage are brutal. Who has the best chance of survival? Who receives the limited resources? Who is deemed unsavable and given only comfort? I make these decisions with mechanical precision, my emotions locked away where they cannot interfere with clinical judgment. This is what I have become. A machine for processing trauma, for sorting the living from the dying, for maintaining function in situations that should shatter sanity. When the immediate crisis passes, when the surviving injured have been stabilized and the dead respectfully covered, I step outside the medical tent. The asteroid's artificial gravity is weak. I feel light, unmoored, as if I might float away into the darkness between stars. Through the viewport dome, I can see the galaxy spread out in all its indifferent beauty. Billions of stars, trillions of lives, all of it churning through cycles of creation and destruction that dwarf any individual existence. Somewhere in that expanse is the asteroid field that was Alderaan. The debris continues to orbit, a cosmic graveyard gradually dispersing, scattering atoms that once formed mountains and oceans and cities across the empty void. In 1,000,000 years, no trace will remain. The asteroids will be absorbed by other bodies, the atoms recycled into new formations, all evidence of what existed erased. Alderaan will be as forgotten as the Masasi whose temples crumbled on Yavin 4, as irrelevant to the universe's ongoing processes as every other civilization that rose and fell and left nothing but ruins. This should be devastating, this cosmic perspective on meaninglessness. Instead, I find it oddly comforting. If nothing matters, if all our sufferings and triumphs are equally insignificant in the grand sweep of time, then survival itself becomes the only meaningful act. To continue existing, to witness, to remember. This is enough. Not victory, not justice, not redemption. Simply persistence. I am an Alderaanian without Alderaan, a musician without music, a healer who cannot heal the wounds that matter most. But I continue. That continuation, that refusal to surrender to despair or death, is the only revenge I can enact against the forces that destroyed my world. A transport arrives to evacuate the most seriously injured to better-equipped facilities. I help load patients, ensuring they are stabilized for travel. One of them, an older woman with severe burns, grasps my hand. "Thank you," she says, her voice barely audible. "You saved my life." I want to tell her that life may not be worth the saving, that survival comes with costs she cannot yet imagine. Instead, I say, "You're welcome. Rest now." She closes her eyes, trusting, and I feel the weight of that trust like a physical burden. We return to the hope of Alderaan as the colony begins the long process of recovery. In my cabin, I add today's total to my count. 13 lives saved, 8 lost, 16 with uncertain prognoses that may swing either way. The numbers accumulate, meaningless and essential. They are proof that I existed, that I mattered, however marginally. In 5 years, in 10, when I am gone, these numbers will be forgotten, along with my name. But for now, they anchor me. Tomorrow we travel to another crisis, another disaster, another opportunity to practice the futile art of trying to mend what the galaxy breaks. The work will continue until it does not. The war, if it can still be called that, or if it has simply become the permanent condition of existence, shows no signs of ending. The Empire fractured but did not die. New conflicts emerge constantly, territorial disputes, ideological clashes, resource competition, the eternal human capacity for violence against ourselves. Alderaan was not the last world to suffer, will not be the last to be forgotten. And I will continue to move through this landscape of perpetual crisis, carrying memories of a dead world, saving lives I cannot truly save, existing in the narrow space between who I was and who I have become. This is what it means to be a survivor of Alderaan's destruction, to carry weight that cannot be set down, to remember what everyone else will forget, to continue functioning after every reason for living has been taken away. I look at my hands one final time before sleep. Scarred, trembling, instruments of healing and almost murder, the hands of a stranger. They are all I have. They are enough. Tomorrow they will work again, will suture wounds and administer medicines, will touch the suffering with whatever compassion I have left. And the day after, and the day after that, until there are no more days. The galaxy does not care about Alderaan. The galaxy does not care about the 2 billion lives lost or the thousands of survivors who carry that loss. The galaxy continues its indifferent rotation, birthing stars and extinguishing them, nurturing life and destroying it with equal randomness. But I care. We survivors care. And as long as we exist, as long as we remember, Alderaan is not completely dead. It lives in our memories, our testimonies, our refusal to let the Empire's greatest crime be forgotten. This is my purpose now. Not music, not healing, not revenge. Simply remembering, simply continuing, simply being a witness to what was lost and what remains. It is not enough, will never be enough, but it is what I can do. And so I do it, day after day, year after year, carrying my dead world with me into whatever future remains for this scarred and endless galaxy.